When you need a lawyer, how do you find the right one? Contact the Chicago Bar Association.
Whether you've been injured or need a will prepared, whether you're buying a home or starting a business, having the right lawyer is essential. The Chicago Bar Association have lawyers who practice in most areas of law and speak a variety of languages.
Don't leave it to chance. Get a referral to a screened, experienced lawyer. Visit chicagobar.org or call 312-554-2001. The Chicago Bar Association. Se habla español.
The Chicago Bar Association was created back in 1874 as just a general resource to help attorneys network with each other and be successful in their practices. The CBA chose to set up the insurance subsidiary because a lot of the members were asking questions about what types of insurance they should tap into. Who's the best resource for legal malpractice insurance, life insurance, health insurance, et cetera, et cetera. And rather than sending those elsewhere, we figured we'd be a better resource if we just kept it all in-house and they had a familiar face to work with on a regular basis. And we think that it's very important to get the word out and let our members know that we're around to help as a resource. On top of that, we can work with any law firm or any attorney in the United States. When a law firm comes to us for a second opinion on their legal malpractice insurance policy, we're usually able to find them a lower price for the same coverage or better coverage, or in some instances, actually both. We can find a lower price for better coverage, which is obviously the end goal. Insurance is something that not a lot of people know the ins and outs of it, and maybe a smaller firm or a solo attorney needs that consultant to really keep them in line or to provide information to take it off of their plate. They have enough going on dealing with clients, collecting bills, doing everything that makes them successful in their profession. What I'm here to do is to be a resource and really just provide assistance in something that they are not inherently an expert in.
Welcome to You and the Law, a Chicago Bar Association production that focuses on matters of law and public policy. We put this show on as a public service. It is for purposes of public education. It airs on public access. And with that, I would like to right away turn over to our guests. We have a big issue. We're going to be talking about Citizens United, which is a landscape changing case, and that might be an understatement, on a couple of levels at least. And we have with us truly, absolutely legendary, Floyd Abrams is with us. And I'm not gonna say too much because I want them to kind of share what they think is relevant for what we're doing today. We also have Professor Jeff Stone, and we also have Professor Rick Hasen. And thank you all for being here with us today. Sincerely appreciate it. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Abrams to get things started. And I don't want to be doing too much talking today, but I will say that one of the many things about Mr. Abrams' career that is legendary, and that's not a hyperbolic term, I don't think here, is the manner in which the First Amendment became sort of a defined practice area through his work, I think, and in the work of everyone here in a way, but certainly Mr. Abrams has had a huge role in that. So, Mr. Abrams, with that, I'd like to turn it over to you. And if you could tell us just a little, I know there's so much and everyone should read Speaking Freely and watch the documentary and all that stuff. But if you can share just a couple thoughts to get us started about where you're coming from and how we can get into Citizens United here.
Well, Citizens United is, of course, one of the maybe most controversial First Amendment cases certainly of this generation, and probably going back some, extremely harshly criticized, I would say, more generally in the press. And there was at least a time in which I think there was a Gallup poll look at how the public viewed the decision. and it was overwhelmingly unfavorable. That is to say, the public did not agree with what the Supreme Court had said, and for those people watching this, who don't do this full time, or maybe they don't even focus too much on a case like this. I mean, the basic holding of the case was that an act of Congress, which essentially made illegal spending of money on election by corporations and unions with respect to their treasury funds, the basic core money of these entities. The statute had said that they could not engage in direct advocacy, express advocacy, who to vote for, basically. So at least in theory, this was a case with enormous impact in terms of making money available for spending on elections. Or the way I would phrase it is, for corporations and unions to be permitted to spend core money that they had in support of or against someone's election. The ruling was extremely controversial. I'll let some of my colleagues describe why, because at least a few of them, I think, shared the sense that the court had gone awry in the wrong direction. I'll just say by way of introduction that I think, and I should say I was involved in the case. I represented Senator McConnell and the Supreme Court argument in the case. I think it is a substantial victory for First Amendment principles, and that saying that because it's a corporation or because it's a union, they can't participate by spending that money in the campaign, I think was a significant step forward in terms of democracy. But that said, I will let my colleagues weigh in.
Sure. I like to turn it over now to Professor Stone, just because you were the host of that program I mentioned at UOC, and I might have mentioned it before we got started rather than on the program. Yeah, that was, and I was there, and it was well attended. And why hold that? Just tell us what you think in general. Why is it so important, a matter of public concern?
Well, I'm a strong believer in free speech, and I believe that restrictions on free speech should be carefully scrutinized. On the other hand, I disagree with the decision in Citizens United for several reasons. One of them is that, first of all, in terms of corporations, an originalist view would have to admit that there was no issue of corporations having First Amendment rights at the time that the Bill of Rights was adopted. And so if one's an originalist, it would seem that the opposite result was clearly the case. But beyond that, a very high standard of justification under the First Amendment should be applied when government regulates speech because of the message being communicated. That's a central component of First Amendment jurisprudence. So if a law said that corporations can't spend money to support Republicans, that would patently be unconstitutional. On the other hand, the court has long recognized that regulations of expressive activities that are not focusing specifically on the message that an individual wants to communicate are generally to be examined with a much less rigorous standard. So, for example, the law can say that no one can use a loudspeaker after 10 o'clock at night in a residential neighborhood, or no one can go into a government building to protest in a way that's disruptive of the program. Those are neutral with respect to the message. And in that situation, the court tends to give a much less rigorous standard. In Citizens United, the regulation was neutral with respect to the ideology or the viewpoint being expressed. And I think, therefore, it was appropriate to recognize that this was, in that sense, a content neutral restriction on speech that should be tested by a less demanding standard than the court actually implied in Citizens United. Moreover, I think it's the case that um, the effect of having huge amounts of money in the political process, both corporate and private, has seriously damaged our democracy.
Right.
My own view is that government officials spend far too much time basically sucking up to potential donors in order to get those resources. And that's not a good use of their time. And it's also not a good use of how they exercise their authority as elected officials. Even if there's not a specific deal, I'll give you money if you agree to vote this way. But it's understood what the interests of the donor and or the corporation in this case might be. And that's, I think, had a very damaging impact upon our political process. You wouldn't want to have, take a simple example, you wouldn't want to have a presidential debate in which the amount of time given to each candidate was based upon how much money they or someone else contributed. One would regard that as ridiculous. That's not how you have a democracy functioning. And
Right.
I think that's the damage that's been caused by Citizens United and other decisions by those justices.
Sure. Thank you very much. So, and I want to move over to Professor Hasen in just a moment, but I wanted to point out just for our viewers, because we are focused really toward lay people, non-lawyers, although certainly we want to encourage lawyers to watch this program too. We're in the middle of an election cycle, and certainly just as a citizen, we're all citizens, our folks watching are citizens. There's a very visceral sense that we would like the people, our leaders and the people selling us ideas, to be speaking to us and not be motivated by special interests. So there's a very visceral sort of trust issue there that's involved. Professor Hasen, and Professor Stone is a known entity, so we didn't get much background. Of course, the University of Chicago, he's done plenty of shows here. This is your first time here, Professor Hasen. If you could please provide us a little background on yourself and then share some thoughts.
Sure. I'm glad to be with you. I specialize in election law. I teach at UCLA, and most of my time now is devoted to I've set up called the Safeguarding Democracy Project, and Floyd is on our board, and we're trying to make sure that we continue to have free and fair elections. We're not focused on the campaign finance issue, but on peaceful transitions of power and against election subversion. So that was not something I thought I'd be dedicating part of my career to, but unfortunately, that's where we are today.
Right, right. So, and that does tie, and I was thinking this also, everyone here is fully engaged in this, but in terms of constitutional design, the nature and dynamics of our democracy. So I really appreciate it. So the big thing that people associate lay people, I would say, just in general, is money and politics, and we have a very basic understanding for what that means. It means the subversion of everyday voices, ordinary people, everyday people, and the amplification of special interests, which are not interested in the Commonwealth, so to speak, as a general proposition. So on the other side of it, and Mr. Abrams did say that he believes, and certainly there are others. There are plenty of folks who are feel that the Citizens United supports is pro-democratic in some way. So I'd like to turn back to Mr. Abrams. And especially in the sense that we're all kind of talking about these issues of democracy and constitutional design and may have differing opinions within, that realm. Can you share with us, Mr. Abrams, why you think it's good for democracy?
Now, let me start by saying that, a bunch of years have now passed since the decision. So I think we can have a pretty good idea, at least, of how it has impacted things. For example, corporations have not spent a lot of money on elections. And for the most part, they never wanted to. They've been pressured or thought it was in their interest, sometimes, of course, to be involved. But the basic, I would say, change in the last 15, 20 years uh, is how much money is being spent on political advocacy by wealthy individuals.
Right.
I mean, that's where the bulk of the money comes from. And my colleagues would, who know this area a bit better than I, would know how long that has been true. But it is certainly true now, and it is in terms of impact on society. Corporations, for the most part, never wanted to be much involved. They were pressured by candidates, for the most part, to be involved. And now that they're allowed to be, they're not. I mean, for the most, there has not been any sort of significant increase in corporate spending. If anything, there has been a significant increase in union spending, that they are also covered by this law, or this new rule of law in the Citizens United case. Uh, uh, Unions have been spending more money than they had before. I ask myself, is society worse off because of the case? That's not the way we lawyers judge cases very often, but as a matter of public policy, I think it's perfectly, fair for us to think about that. And I don't have very strong views after saying I think it ought to be allowed. About the answer to the question is, how different are we because of the Citizens United ruling? I'm confident that there's not much of a difference at all with respect to corporations, because they're just not spending the big bucks on elections. Unions have been spending more, but whether that's because of Citizens United striking down barriers, or maybe just uh, leading to more thought about which entity that cares about who wins and loses elections might want to spend it. Um, but again, the primary source now, certainly in more recent years, has been wealthy people uh, making very major contributions. uh, In some cases, vast amount of contributions. Um, and so I'm really interested in whether my colleagues here today uh, I agree at least with that the big money now is coming from individuals. I would say it never came in big money from corporations, and I would certainly say that's not happening now.
All right, I like to drill down a little bit and then pass it to our guests, and I want to focus just briefly on the um, private person, wealthy folks spending a lot of money, because it seems like whether it's corporations or what we might call generally the donor class, the net result seems to be without question a diminution of individual voices and the amplification of large special interests. So I think regardless of whether it's in the form of corporations or individual wealthy folks or groups, I mean, when we have PACs, like for example, I'll just use one example, although there are many. APAC, which is the American Israel Political Affairs Committee, spent $100 million in Democratic primaries and is openly bragging that 100% of APAC endorsed Democratic candidates have won their primary race. Now, we don't have to get into great detail, but you can see that we can understand why this is an issue, because there are major foreign policy issues and there are major domestic issues associated with that. And we can extrapolate that across dimensions, whether we're talking about energy, military industrial complex, I don't, Raytheon, these companies that are involved in this have tremendous amplification of their voices. And in short, it becomes a question of whether we're going to have a democracy if we're not hearing from everyday people, is one way to sort of look at it. With that, maybe I can go to Professor Stone if you want to chime in, and then we'll move to Professor Hasen.
Well, I think that Citizens United, of course, was about corporations and unions. And I do think there's an argument one can make, particularly about corporations, that they're not meant to be political players in our democratic system. And therefore, they don't necessarily have the same First Amendment rights as individuals. But I think that the larger problem created by Citizens United is that effectively it eliminated any effort to constrain the amount of money being spent in the political process. Although it didn't individuals, if once Citizens United was decided, it was pretty clear you weren't going to allow government regulations that prohibited billionaires from spending as much as they wanted. And I think the consequence of that has been to totally distort our political system. What I would have done as a justice is not only to reach the opposite result in Citizens United, but I also would have said that it's constitutional to limit the amount that individual citizens can spend to support particular candidates, both for the sense of having a more just democracy, and also for the sense of avoiding having elected officials feel as if they're indebted to the views of their very large donors. So at the present time, we have a political system that is very much dominated by huge amounts of money. And that's just not the way anybody ever intended it to be.
Professor Hasen. Thanks, Professor Stone.
So I think we need to distinguish first between the holding of Citizens United, which, as Floyd pointed out, was just about corporations, and what we might call the Citizens United era, which is a series of cases and Federal Election Commission rulings and inaction by Congress that have created a system that I think everyone should agree is nonsensical. It's a system that says that you can't give more than X amount to a candidate, a federal candidate. It's going to be a little over $3,000 under the current law, but you can give unlimited sums to a group that essentially works hand in glove with the candidate. And so we have this illusion that we have regulation, and when in fact we don't. And what the money buys is, I analogize it in one of my books, Plutocrats United, to buying more lottery tickets. You are buying more of a chance to influence both who wins the election and public policy. And it's fundamentally inegalitarian. The problem is not Citizens United. The problem is Buckley versus Vallejo, which is a 1976 decision on which Citizens United was built. But we have a system where people are now, and to answer Floyd's question, this was not true before Citizens United. We did not have people giving over $100 million to groups that were trying to support or oppose candidates for office. This is a fundamental change. And also thanks in part to Congress and the IRS's failure to act, there are easy ways for that money not to be disclosed. And so we don't really know how much corporations are giving. We know how much they're giving to candidates. It's zero. They're still not allowed to give directly to candidates. We know how much they give to super PACs. It's not that much, but we don't know exactly how much they're giving to these outside groups and through other groups. But the fundamental problem is one of inequality. It's one where those who have the greatest resources have a greater ability, again, like buying lottery tickets, better chance to be able to have the ear of the candidates, to be able to influence public policy, and to be able to influence who is elected.
Right.
And just one last point on the nonsensical nature of this, and Floyd and I debated this probably a decade ago at the University of Michigan. At the same time that the Supreme Court says that the identity of the speaker doesn't matter, and that corporations have the exact First Amendment rights, they could spend anything they want, unlimited, so long as it's not coordinated with a candidate, a person cannot spend 50 cents to make a flyer to say, vote for Harris or vote for Trump and distribute it in Central Park if they're not a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. And the Supreme Court has never explained, it summarily affirmed a case called Blumen versus Federal Election Commission, meaning it agreed with the result without saying why. The Supreme Court has never explained why if the First Amendment is really about what everyone should hear, an unfettered discussion, why treating foreign individuals and entities differently than artificial entities like corporations makes sense under any understanding of the First Amendment.
Thank you
But
very much. So I'm reminded very briefly, I'll go to Floyd for a response to that. I just wanted to throw in, we have, because these shows are so short and we have so much to cover, right? But we have under 5 minutes left. So I want to go to Floyd and then we can close out.
I just say that I think foreign money is different in its nature. Of foreign entities don't even purport to really speak for our country. I mean, they have, or at least the people who have the money to a considerable degree, have their own interests. And I think it's perfectly rational to have a body of law which cracks down on, limits the amount of foreign involvement in our electoral process. Beyond that, I would only say that I don't disagree that there's a lot in our system which favors the wealthy. I mean, that's not new, but it's true. And I think it's undeniable. I mean, in general, what we've said is that the people are allowed to sound off, to speak. The money is, in a way, a form of speech. The money is a way of getting engaged, sometimes, as Rick points out, maybe dangerously involved in the process. But it's not as if it's just free floating. It's money allows speech, and yes, I hear you when you're saying maybe it allows too much speech for people with, as it were, too much money or willing to spend too much money, and that's a harder question for me as well.
Okay, I want to follow up very briefly on 2 points. One is that, there's an AC/DC song called Money Talks. We all know what that means. It's very visceral. And certainly when people talk louder, the voice is like, we're on public access. Who's going to see this? What resources do we have? We have a tremendous amount of work that you all put into developing your expertise here. I hope people watch it. I wish we had $100 million to promote it, but we don't. That also, I wanted to, you brought up foreign actors, foreign lobbies. There should probably be, what I'm hearing, more scrutiny on what foreign lobbies are doing and what it means to be a foreign lobby, because it sounds like it is an issue of national security to a degree when we look at it that way. Am I right?
I certainly think so, and I think that I'm not someone who believes that foreign entities should be allowed to participate in elections, but I also believe you could have reasonable limits on the ultra wealthy and
Right.
corporations.
I agree with that.
All right, great. Well, listen, we're right at time, so I can't thank you enough, truly, for your time and sharing your expertise with us at the CBA and for the public benefit. So, with that, thank you all for tuning into this episode of View in the Law.